The Holy Gospel according to Luke, the 17th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. On the way to Jerusalem, Jesus was going through the region between Samaria and Galilee. As he entered a village, 10 lepers approached him. Keeping their distance, they called out, saying, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." And when he saw them, he said to them, "Go and show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, they were made clean. Then one of them, when he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. He prostrated himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him. And he was a Samaritan. Then Jesus asked, "Were not 10 made clean? But the other 9, where are they? Was none of them found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner?" And he said to them, "Get up and go on your way. Your faith has made you well." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. You may be seated. Good morning, everybody. So I am certain that we've all heard this story before in church many times. You know, as Jesus has been walking towards the city of Jerusalem, he notices that there were 10 people standing outside of the gates. Their skin was overpowered with their sickness, a visible sign that they had been cast out from their society. And they wouldn't be allowed to come back into the doors of the city until they were clean. As Jesus approached them, we can imagine that he knew what was going on with them. He could see their ailment, knowing that society would urge him to avoid the unclean. But the lepers looked up and they saw that it was Jesus coming into the city, and they recognized him and begged him to be healed. And when Jesus saw them, he gave them pretty clear instructions: go show yourselves to the priests. And unlike what we read about in the 2 Kings, these lepers didn't need to go and wash themselves in the river 7 times. Instead, they were to walk to the priest and be evaluated by him. And if the lepers were clean, they would be allowed to re-enter society again. So without pause, the lepers followed Jesus' instructions, and on the way, they were healed. Jesus had healed them from their disease. So now, this is the point in the sermon where I'm supposed to tell you that this is where the good news is, that if you believe in Jesus, you will be healed from all of your ailments, right? Or if I told you you had to hold on to your faith, and that if you really, truly, truly believed with all of your heart that all Jesus needed to do was speak, 5 words, and you'd be cured from everything. Oh, and also don't forget to thank God once you've been cured. Turn back around. But we know this isn't true. My obvious problem with this story is the questions that come for those of us who aren't getting this immediate healing, or honestly, any healing at all. It makes us question, where is the good news for us when we're suffering? Where's the good news for those who are living on the streets, who are in tents begging people for money? Where's the good news for those who are dying slowly of a disease? Or for those of us who are feeling the overwhelm of this point in the semester, in a season where our mental illnesses might be flaring up? And while we never know if, or honestly even when, that healing will happen for us, we can look to the text and see how Jesus acted. Friends, we can see that the good news isn't in the miracle that Jesus had performed, but in the actions that happened before the healing. You see, after the lepers had cried out for Jesus, begging for mercy, Jesus saw them. And when Jesus saw them, he didn't just look with his eyes at the lepers. He saw something much deeper. When he saw the lepers, he saw them with his heart. And when Jesus saw this pain and suffering, he felt such a deep compassion for them. And it was in that deep compassion that Jesus chose to help. This is where the good news is. When we're in the midst of our suffering, when we're feeling just overwhelmed with everything going on, we know that Jesus sees us with his heart. When we're waiting, some of us are praying or even crying out to God for that healing to come. We know that we aren't alone in our suffering. You see, God looks upon each and every one of us, and God sees our pain. God hears your cries. God knows your heart. And while we don't know if this healing will ever come for us, we do know that God is sitting right beside us. And even though we might not be miraculously healed in that moment, God does give us what we need, whether it be compassion, love, or even a sense of community. Knowing that God sees us in our pain can also bring us a sense of comfort and hope. I know I've seen this a few times, especially when I worked at the night ministry. For those who don't know, the night ministry is an organization that works with the homeless community in Chicago. And every shift, we would go out on our van, we'd answer phone calls, and we would help those in need. Sometimes we'd make appointments with specific people, and other times we would drive around the city of Chicago, going to tent cities, and passing out items such as food, clothing, condoms, and even clean needles. I remember one time we got a phone call from a man named Alan, someone who would hang out in the downtown area. When he called us, he was freaking out, telling us that he had just been robbed and he didn't know what to do. He had lost his photo ID and a social security card, which were important things that he needed in order to get an apartment. And some days, when we get calls like this, and due to what's going on, we try to empathize with them, take a deep breath, and make an appointment with them, or try to plan when we'll see them in the upcoming week. Other days, like this day, we ended up being at the right place at the right time, and we were able to help. Alan wasn't sure what our response would be, but I don't think he expected us to be there 20 minutes later. And when we arrived to meet Alan, we could see the look of relief on his face. He was so happy to see us. He told us that before he had called us, before he had found our number, that he'd been praying for a miracle, asking God to help him in his time of need. And we were able to sit down and talk with him, making sure that he was okay and not hurt from what had happened. We empathized with him, and we listened to him when he cried. I reaffirmed him that God was with him in that moment, and he told me that he usually, and always in some sense, felt God's presence ever since he had been on the streets. And Alan didn't know it, but we had the right forms in our van, and we were able to get him a free voucher for a new photo ID. Alan also told us that he had lost his link card, so we gave him a couple bags of food for a few days. And we gave him information to where the closest food bank was, and when he asked about where he was supposed to take his voucher, we gave him directions to the closest DMV. When we had left, Alan had a sense of direction and hope, And he told me that he just knew God would be with him in every step of the way. In Alan's time of need, God was present. God had the deepest compassion for Alan and had allowed our timelines to connect in the most perfect way. And even though the miracle of a house or an apartment didn't come that day, God still showed up and gave Alan the love and the care that he needed in that moment. So friends, let us remember that God hears our cries, that God looks at us with a deep and calming love. The God of the unclean, the homeless, the sick, and the weary will continuously show up for us, bringing us love and a deep compassion in our times of need. Amen.